And that's Tenacious. Buenos días, amigos. Hola, me llamo Ricky Tenacio y bienvenido al Tenacio Tiempo Podcast. Hoy en día es el lunes de septiembre 29, 2016. Estoy muy excitado por llevar a usted el primer episodio de este podcast. En el episodio de hoy, for the purpose of this podcast and its viewers, this podcast will now be in English. Okay, that's much better now. So now that I'm speaking in a language that hopefully most of my viewers can understand, hi, hello, how are you? My name is Ricky Tenacious, and I'm the host of the Tenacious Time podcast. I am super and so excited to finally be doing a podcast. This is something that I wanted to do for a very long time. But before we go any further, let me formally introduce myself. As I said, my name is Ricky Tenacious, and I am an independent professional wrestler from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I am also a part-time ring announcer. I am the current Big Valley Wrestling fighting champion, as well as the youngest ever Big Valley Wrestling fighting champion, because I am only 19 years old. In addition to that, I'm a filmmaker and a player of Magic the Gathering. I am a Dragon Ball Z enthusiast, vaping enthusiast, leader of the Vape Nation, of course, star of Tenacious TV, and now to add to all of that, host of this podcast. And on my listeners list, I'm most likely now on their most hated list because I'm pretty sure all of those things are something that you either like or hate. So without further ado, let's just keep on going. As I said, this is the very first edition of the Tenacious Time podcast. So let me tell you all about what is the Tenacious Time podcast. Why is it called Tenacious Time? Tenacious Time is, or it's time to get tenacious, as I would usually say, is a catchphrase that I kind of coined in my career. I also like to say, and that's tenacious, as you all heard at the very beginning of the podcast. So this podcast is, I guess you could say, pro wrestling oriented, being I am a wrestler, and I'm most likely going to be talking about wrestling stuff, as well as having guests that are also fellow professional wrestlers here from Las Vegas, or if I ever can, maybe get some out of towners, excuse me, from like Arizona or California, Utah, because you never know. I like to surprise my viewers. The guests that I want to have on here are not just going to be professional wrestlers. I also want to involve people that I find interesting, or just have a really cool profession, or their profession can lead to a really awesome conversation, which is really what I hope to accomplish from doing this podcast. Not just having cool conversations with my guests, but also cool conversations for the viewers, you, to listen in on a weekly basis. I intend to have guests that are filmmakers like myself, possibly music artists, or just people in my life that I feel are so awesome that that their voice needs to be heard in some way, shape, or form. In that form being a podcast. So I want to talk about, why am I doing a podcast? This has been a really long time coming for me. I guess it would, by long time coming, I mean it's been about 2 years now that I've rolled around the idea of doing a podcast. The idea popped in my head through filmmaker Kevin Smith. If you don't know who Kevin Smith is, I'll try to give you a little rap sheet about him. He is a very notable filmmaker. He is the man behind films such as Clerks, its sequel, of course, Zack and Miri Make a Porno. He recently came out with a few films, Red State, as well as Tusk. But I think the one he's most notable for is Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. If you're familiar with those characters, he is the man who created them. He actually also plays the part of Silent Bob. So if you've ever seen Jane Silent Bob, then you've seen who Kevin Smith is. All in all, he's a really awesome guy, very enthusiastic, very passionate. Excuse me again about what he does. Just for future reference, I apologize if I stutter a little bit or if I say a lot. I'm just I like to talk a lot, and I have a lot of ideas that I really just want to express on here. So as I was saying, why am I doing the podcast? Kevin Smith. Uh, about 2 years ago, I attended a Q&A session that Kevin Smith held here. That's one of the things he does pretty often. That is one of the other things he's well known for, because he has a lot of stories, with him being a filmmaker and making movies and having all these connections, and all that just comes with a bunch of stories that he's been able to tell and relate to his fan base and audience. He's done numerous Q&A sessions, which kind of led to him doing podcasting. He has a few podcasts himself. He has Hollywood Babylon, Fat Man on Batman, the Nerdiest Podcast. I'm not sure if this is called a podcast or if this is the name of the company that produces all the podcasts he does, called Smodcast. So as I was saying, he came to Las Vegas about 2 years ago and did a Q&A session, which of course I attended. I was 18 at the time, so I was able to attend and not worry about my age, because I would have been so bummed out if I wanted to attend and they wouldn't let me in because I was just too young. So of course, I got right in line for the line of people to ask questions, and the question I asked him was who made him want to become a filmmaker, and we ended up having a lot in common. My big inspiration, the reason why I make short films, is Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Martin Scorsese, and he basically said all those names as well, along with a few others. But one thing he would do, pretty much for just about every question or like every story that he told, he alluded back to why everyone should podcast, because it's given him such a positive outlook on life, or just another positive outlook, because podcasting really is something valuable that everyone should try to take advantage of. If you have a microphone, or you don't even exactly need a microphone. If you just have a computer with a voice recorder and a YouTube page, then you can make a podcast. You just record what you want to say and then upload it to YouTube with a picture for the visual. But excuse me, I'm swallowing a bunch of saliva because I'm talking so much. I should probably slow down. That what you guys just heard is probably going to be misinterpreted as so many things, but that was the sound of me drinking water. So I really apologize if by the end of this podcast, or if by now some of my viewers have already decided to turn off this thing that I'm calling a podcast, or if by the end of this podcast you're able to actually survive and that your ears aren't bleeding so much. But as I was saying, Kevin Smith would allude back to why everyone should podcast, and he would mention how it's your voice, and you should take advantage of it and get it out there, express your opinions, whether that opinion be about what you thought about the latest Batman movie, or what you thought about a pro wrestling show you went to, or just an idea you have, like or a tips on building a business. That's usually, there's podcasts all around the internet, and they cover so many different subjects, and some of them are just hosts like me, who just have a certain profession like professional wrestling and want to sit down with other wrestlers and talk about wrestling, because that's something I'm really passionate about. Podcasters, they talk about stuff that they're passionate about. And the best part about it all with podcasting is that in most cases it is 100% free. Depending if you want to like download, certain programs or applications, but most of the time, if you have a computer, you will have a program on there where you can record your voice. And of course, with YouTube nowadays, you can just upload it onto there and then share it, and people will be able to hear what you're talking about. And then on top of that, podcasting is, for some people, have made them really successful and became a source of income. Where let's say your podcast gets really popular, it's getting thousands of views, and so you start offering sponsorships to other businesses or other podcasts, and then you put in a certain part of your show where you have you advertise your sponsor, and then they pay you for that. And let's say maybe like you charge like 300 a commercial, and then you get three sponsors. That's $900 in your pocket per episode. Then that's like enough to quit your daytime job. And that's definitely something. It's pretty much one of the goals that I have for this podcast. Speaking of goals, of course, I would like this podcast to become something I do regularly, which is my plan. I want to do it, at least once every week. I want to have a guest on. I want to grow my viewers. I want to build a brand for myself. I want to get eventually so into it or make money from this where I can invest in a really expensive looking and awesome sounding microphone, and be able to put my podcasts on other podcast outlets on the internet so more people can listen to them. So back what I was saying about Kevin Smith, he just kept alluding back to how everyone should podcast. And just like me right now, I keep sidetracking with different stories and words and sentences, and I keep coming back to. And as I was saying about Kevin Smith, that's probably going to happen quite a bit on this podcast. So if you don't like that, then I would definitely not blame you for turning off this podcast, because this is the inaugural first episode. All we're going to be doing today is just me talking about why I want to do a podcast, what is the podcast, and also give you guys some history about me. So I'm sure by this time, if you haven't turned off the podcast, either you must have a really big tolerance for me, because most people don't, especially when I'm talking for long periods of times. And so by the end of the Q&A, Kevin Smith speaks with such enthusiasm, and he's such a big advocate of just getting off your ass and doing what you want to do, whether it be filmmaking, podcasting, photography, acting. You only have so much time on this earth. You want to voice every opinion you can, tell the stories you can, make all the stories you can, and just lead into one thing after the other. And so by the end of that Q&A, I said to myself, you know what? Not only do I really want to chase this filmmaking thing, but I somewhere down the line, I want to start a podcast. And just last week, I was watching some videos on podcasting, and I said, you know what? It's really time that I stop putting this to the side. It's time I start doing it, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And I'm really happy to be doing it. I have lots of stories. Speaking of stories, let's go and get into the next section of the show, which is going to be me talking about basically history of me in wrestling. So this is going to be giving you guys some information about myself that you probably don't know about. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But for most of the viewers on here, which I would suppose are friends, family, wrestling fans, people that may be mentally challenged enough to, actually listen to this podcast. I'm just so bad about myself, really. But so I guess it all started. My story of why I got into wrestling is a pretty big, just your average storybook story, where I was young and I would watch wrestling, and I just grew up with it, and I was a big fan of it, and it hooked me immediately to where I said, you know what, this is something I want to do. I wouldn't exactly say that I was born into the business, but I definitely grew around. I grew up around I grew up around wrestling because my dad was the referee for the hit 80s and 90s all girls wrestling show, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. He was he was the original referee for that show, and so he'd always tell me about that. And of course, he was always a big fan of wrestling, so he'd watch Monday Night Raw every Monday night, and I'd watch it with him and my brother. And just right off the bat, I was so memorized by the characters and the storylines and the theatrics of it all, and I was hooked. I don't think there's one Monday night in my life where I've missed an episode of Monday Night Raw. Or I mean, because now I go to wrestling training on Monday nights, and so but I'll always get back home enough time to like catch the last hour of Raw, which is usually like when all the good stuff happens. But as I was saying, I grew up around it, and I just watched it a lot, and I would always say to myself, and like my dad and my mom, that one day I'm gonna go to the WWE and I'm gonna win the Royal Rumble, and I'm gonna go to WrestleMania, and I'm gonna win the championship belt, and it's gonna be so awesome, and it's gonna be exactly what I want. And that's pretty much like the biggest goal I would say that I have in life. That's like that I would feel is almost seemingly impossible, but nothing's impossible if you can set your mind to it. And now that I'm wrestling and I've been involved in the business for a few years now, especially in the time we live in right now, where WWE is now looking at and signing more guys from the independent circuit. Now is probably the best time to get into the wrestling business, in my opinion. So back to what I was saying. I grew up, around wrestling as a wrestling fan, and I believe I was 8 years old. I want to say when I started doing amateur wrestling or collegiate wrestling. My dad did it, or my dad wrestled in high school, so he encouraged me that I should try to wrestle collegiately for a youth program that would do practices at a high school. And so I did, and it was absolutely grueling at first because for an 8-year-old boy, I had never exposed myself or involved myself in such a physically demanding and brutal workout. Or at least for me at that time, at that young of age, we were doing laps and we were doing push-ups, sit-ups, bear crawls, sprints, suicide runs, and of course wrestling. And it was so brutal for a little boy like me. I'd never done something like that. After my first practice, I did not want to go back. I was so sore the next day at school. I was crying, and I begged my dad, I do not want to go back to this. Please don't make me go back to this. And he said, "Listen, Ricky, you're just sore. Just give it another try. I'm telling you, you're gonna like this. If you really want to be a wrestler, you should do this." And so I did go back, and just over time it got easier, and I got more accustomed to the workout. And even though I was accustomed to it, and my cardio started catching up with it, it was still hard every time. It was still a grueling workout for me. But it all paid off when I started wrestling. Wrestling, at certain tournaments was a lot of fun. And even though I didn't win a lot at first, and before I won, I was just really happy to. It's just really fun to compete. It's really fun to be able to roll around on the mat and try to win and be around that environment. And overall, I could say that in a way, I was a wrestler. But deep down inside, I always wanted to be a pro wrestler. That's what I really wanted to do. And so I believe I was 10 years old, and a wrestling promotion, the National Wrestling Alliance, came to the Orleans Arena to do a show called the Copa de Lucha, which stands for Cup of Wrestle. It was a tag team tournament, and then the winning team got this trophy called the Copa de Lucha. And so when that part of the show came, of course I was in attendance if you haven't caught on yet, but they presented the trophy, and the guy who presented it was this guy, Kent Wilson, who I didn't really know that's who that was exactly until I bought the DVD and I skimmed it and stuff. But at that same event, my dad found a business card for a promotion called Adrenaline Unleashed, and they were a professional wrestling promotion that was also a school where you could learn to be a wrestler. And so I that was kind of like my Willy Wonka golden ticket right there. Like I held on to it, and I was like, Dad, we gotta go, we gotta go. I kept begging him. I always bugged him about it for a very long time until one Monday night we went over to the address, and I basically joined in. I was 11 years old at the time. I actually lied about my age. You had to be I think the youngest they accepted for kids was 12 years old. They did 12 to 15, and but I was pretty big for my age. I wrestled. I was wrestling at like the 150 weight category, and if I wanted to, I probably could have passed for 14 at that time. But I was 11 years old, getting in the ring with guys who were 20, 30 years old, and my dad was also training as well. But I was just really happy that I was able to get into the ring and start learning how to be a wrestler. Luckily, because of amateur wrestling, the cardio part of pro wrestling training wasn't too bad for me. It was, of course, it was still very hard at some times, but with the combination of amateur wrestling and pro wrestling, it really helped out my cardio a lot. So that's always been really good in the long run. But one thing that would hinder me is that I would do professional wrestling training for 9 months, and then I would take 3 months off from it to go back to the amateur wrestling season. And the reason why that hindered me is because if you ever train to be a wrestler, or if you are a wrestler, or you're thinking of becoming a wrestler, here's probably a really big tip. If you're going to start wrestling, it would probably not be wise to take time off, because wrestling, when you're starting to learn it, or pro wrestling, there's a lot of things you're gonna have to think about, and you're gonna learn, and a lot of knowledge you're gonna take in. And if you're you have training going for a few months, and then you just stop and you come back, you're gonna be what's called rusty, and that's what happened to me. I was really rusty. My rolls weren't that great. My cardio had kind of decreased. A lot of what I learned kind of just totally left my mind. And so because of that, I did this whole process twice, where I would wrestle for 9 months and then go back to amateur for 3. This really hindered me, and I'd learn a lot, and then I'd kind of lose it almost. But once I got to high school, I joined the wrestling team at my zone school, because I went to a technical career school, and I would do training 5 days a week. After school, and then I would come home, do homework, eat, whatever it is I needed to do, and then at night I would go to professional wrestling training. And so once I got into that habit for about 2 years, I was able to keep all the information that I learned, all the knowledge, all while still amateur wrestling. I was getting some really, really great exercise too, which is always good in the long run, of course, especially for me, because I was really fat back then. But and then I think it was 2012. Yeah, 2012. The summer of 2012. I was 14 years old at the time, and I made my professional wrestling debut in Adrenaline Unleashed. And I will tell you right now, I mark that, my debut professional wrestling match, as by far the happiest moment in my life. Before I went out there, the trainer Kent. Oh, speaking of Kent, I totally forgot to include this, but as I was saying before, the guy who presented the Copa de Lucha, Kent Wilson, was the owner of Adrenaline Unleashed, which is probably why there was business cards for AU at that event. And he was pretty much the guy who trained me. I also learned from a few other really notable wrestlers like Ryan Taylor and Allison Ager. But as I was saying, my debut wrestling match, happiest moment of my life. It was a big culmination of just a lot of hard work and hard training, and this was it. Standing behind that curtain, realizing that any moment my music is gonna play, and then I'm gonna go out through that curtain, and I'm gonna entertain the holy hell out of those people, and by the end of it, I'm gonna be able to say that I'm a wrestler now. And that alone was really awesome. Before I went out there, Kent gave me a big hug, congratulating me on finally making it. My dad gave me a hug as well. It was just a really big sentimental moment. I'll never forget how awesome I felt. And of course, the match went really well. I had a lot of fun, came back through the curtain, and it was basically all over before I knew it. As I said, I was 14 at the time, and about that same month I would be turning 15. So I guess you could say I started wrestling when I was 14, all Rey Mysterio like, or but in most cases I'll say 15. And then from there on, from the summer of 2012, I basically wrestled at least once every month for Adrenaline Unleashed. That was pretty much the only promotion that I'd wrestle for because I was still in high school. I didn't really have time to go out on the weekends to try to pursue other wrestling bookings. I was just focusing on school and being lucky enough to wrestle at least once a month, and live my dream. And then unfortunately in 2014, I think it was October or November, Adrenaline Unleashed would shut down, close its doors for certain reasons. And so there was another wrestling promotion in town that I guess which immediately came to mind. If I wanted to keep wrestling, I'd probably have to go over there. I didn't want to have to do that immediately. And so luckily, from the ashes of Adrenaline Unleashed, there was a few core guys who banded together and wanted to basically start a promotion. I think at first they wanted to try to keep Adrenaline going, but eventually they just decided to start their own promotion, and so I basically hopped on that wagon with them. And then after about a month or two, we got a ring, we got everything settled in, and I started training with them, and they started a promotion called Big Valley Wrestling, and we started doing shows at the Las Vegas Roller Hockey Center, which was also where Adrenaline Unleashed did their shows. And ever since December of 2014, BBW has been doing shows there at least once a month. I'm really happy that all happened the way it did, and I'm really happy that those guys were so passionate enough to band together and keep something different going. But as I said, the other promotion that I was referring to is Future Stars of Wrestling, which has been around for 7 years now. And just this year, I started working for them. I made my debut at their student showcase, wrestling Cutthroat Cody in a losing effort, unfortunately. Or I think I should say I lost the match. I don't want to say losing effort because then I basically sound like a jobber, and that's not something I want to be. But yeah, so I wrestled Cutthroat Cody, lost the match, but I was really just glad to be able to expand my talents to another promotion in town. So I at that time I had FSW on my resume and BBW. This year as well, I also just started wrestling out of town. I've wrestled in Utah a little bit. I just now started wrestling in Arizona. I've wrestled in California a little bit. All in all, really fun stuff. I think by this time next year, I'm definitely gonna probably have wrestled out of town a lot more. I have a lot of goals. I definitely want to expand my horizons more. If I could, I'd love to work every weekend in some state, somewhere in some ring. So yeah, FSW, BBW. At this time, for wrestling fans, it's no stranger to any wrestling fan that, or it's no secret to any wrestling fan that pro wrestling in Las Vegas has really been booming in the past year and a half. We've had multiple promotions starting to run in Vegas on regular occasions at one time. As I said, we have BVW, we have FSW, we have Paragon Pro Wrestling, which films at Sam's Town. For a little while, we had ERA Extreme Ring Action. We had Jeff Jarrett's promotion, Global Force Wrestling, doing tapings at the Orleans Arena. We have Freak Show Wrestling, which is headed up by Sin Bodhi. I believe that originated in California and has been doing shows at the Fremont Country Club. And from what I've seen, it's been very successful. I feel like I'm forgetting a promotion that I really hate. Yeah, it just popped up. 3PW, Power Precision Pro Wrestling. They were doing some shows last year and earlier this year as well at a Mida shop. And that's pretty much all of the promotions that I can name off the top of my head. But yeah, at one time, I think it was, I want to say last year, maybe even earlier this year still, But at one time, all those promotions that I named were running at one time. Like they were, there was so much wrestling in Las Vegas, so much. It was absolutely crazy for a fan to have to think about what promotion they want to, spend money on. But for the wrestlers, it was a really good thing because it offered a lot more work and a lot more opportunities to expand our brands. And now it's kind of died down a little bit. Now it's mainly BVW, FSW, PPW still going strong, Freak Show Wrestling, and but I should probably I probably shouldn't say like knock on wood or anything, but I have a feeling that Las Vegas is gonna boom with pro wrestling again at some time. For me, I've always felt Las Vegas has been a prime spot for pro wrestling. It's kind of like it's almost becoming like California, because if you know anything about California wrestling, you know that there is a shit ton of wrestling in SoCal, NorCal, and pretty much the entire state of California. So this has been the first episode of Tenacious Time. Sorry if I bored you guys or if I wasn't interesting enough, but I promise you, this is just the start, honestly, because this episode we didn't have a guest, but next episode we will have a guest. Look out on my social media, which I'm going to be plugging in a quick second. Sorry, I keep pausing because like I said, I'm talking a lot and I have to, swallow my saliva and restart with the talking. And this is basically what you have to look for, what I and you have to look forward to if you continue to listen to this podcast. Yes, in the future we will have more guests here, interesting guests. We're gonna be talking about stuff, and that's basically what a podcast is people talking about stuff, and then as viewers, you are there to listen to it. So, without further ado, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to the very first edition of the Tenacious Time podcast. And I really hope you guys tune in next time. Before I leave, I want to give a few shout-outs. My first shout-out is going to be to George Elias and Shane Nicholson with Lazy Eye Productions. They are a group that produces short films. They have their own YouTube channel called Lazy Eye Productions. Please go look them up on Facebook and YouTube. Go like their channel. Go subscribe to it. Watch their videos. I recently just starred in one of their short films called Facsimile. It was a lot of fun. I really hope we get to collaborate on a project again. They're really awesome. George Elias actually used to have his own podcast. I believe it was called the Medium Rare Podcast. I was a guest on it at one time. And it was also one of the contributing factors that really made me want to start podcasting. Next shout out is going to be for Kane Tricco. He is my manager, the producer. He comes to the ring with me. He's an awesome guy. He's also a legitimate and very successful music producer here in Las Vegas. He is the CEO of Tricco Entertainment. I want to give another shout out to you guys, the viewers, the listeners, for being able to actually, if you've made it all the way through to this point of this podcast, I absolutely applaud you so much, because I'm pretty sure you're so sick of my voice already, and you're just wondering when it's going to end or why you even decided to tune into this stupid podcast. But so those are my shout outs. I want to plug a few things right now. My social media, as I said, you can, I don't have a Facebook page for the Ricky Tenacious character, but I do have my regular Facebook page, or my personal profile, and I also use it to promote all my wrestling events. It's called Ricky Triforce Tenacious. Go ahead and send me a friend request, or you can follow me on there if that's what you prefer instead. Also, I have a YouTube channel called Tenacious TV, which has recently been picked up by said Mr. Kane Tricco, and I am the star of that lovely YouTube channel and show. There you can find full-length matches, you can find interviews, you can find vlogs, you can find this podcast, which I'll be posting to my YouTube channel as well, some short films that I've done. And then I also would like to let you guys know about where you can see me perform live. You can see me wrestle at Big Valley Wrestling for their show New Stars Rising on September 4th. That's a Sunday. Show starts at 2 p.m. It takes place at the Sahara Event Center, which is in the Commercial Center at 953 East Sahara, which is just off of Sahara and Maryland Parkway. So if you have time, please go check it out. It's only $5 for kids, $10 for adults. If you come, you get to watch me wrestle, which of course is always a pleasure. And after the show, if I may be able to interest you in a Ricky Tenacious 8x10, which I will sign for free. And then also, if I like you enough, I will vape in your face for free. Also, we have Future Stars of Wrestling. Their show is on September 10th at the FSW Training Facility, which is located at 6035 Harrison Drive. Bell time is 7 p.m. I will be ring announcing because I am not only a professional wrestler, but I'm also a part-time ring announcer, and I'm going to get into that story a little later. So if you want to hear about how that came to be, tune in next time, and we'll be talking about that with me, myself, and my guest. If I can get a guest, which I'm pretty sure I'll be able to. So just check out Lazy Eye Productions. Check out my social media. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Once again, thank you very, very much for listening in. This is, like I said, I'm really, really excited to start podcasting, to be able to sit down every week with a guest or just talk to a microphone and vent my ideas and my opinions. And most importantly, I really appreciate you guys for listening in. So without further ado, it has been that time of getting tenacious. It has been the tenacious time. Until next time, everyone, stay tenacious. Over and out.